In this video, I'm going to show you how to get the most out of your GoPro Hero 11 in low light environments. On this channel, I share all the latest action camera news, reviews, and how-tos, so like and subscribe to get the most out of your camera. How well the camera performs in low light has a lot to do with the size of the camera sensor. A larger sensor can gather more light and will have larger pixels, which means a higher resolution image. Action cameras are bad in low light because the sensors need to be small to keep the size and weight of the camera down. No one wants to ride down a hill with this strapped to their head. There are 3 adjustments we can make to improve the camera's low light performance. We can adjust the frames per second, the shutter speed, and the ISO. There are a few other tips I'll share later in the video, so make sure you watch all the way to the end. Frames per second is how many still images your camera is taking every second. So if you set your camera to 24 frames per second, it is taking 24 still images every second. In low light situations, you want to lower the frames per second. That allows the sensor to gather more light, which brightens the image. Conversely, if you're shooting in slow motion, the camera is set to 120 to 240 frames per second, so not a lot of light can make it in, so you need to shoot slow motion on a bright sunny day. Next is shutter speed. The 180-degree shutter rule states that the shutter speed should be set at twice the frame rate. If your camera is set to 24 frames per second, the shutter speed should be set to 1/48th or 1/50th. If your camera is set to 30 frames per second, it should be set to 1/60th. Following the 180-degree shutter rule creates motion blur, giving your video a more natural look. However, in low light situations, you may have to break this rule. If your camera is stationary or recording a relatively still image, you want that slow shutter speed. But if you're walking around and moving, if you keep that shutter speed too low, it makes the light blurry. If you take a look at your footage and notice when you're walking around the light is blurring, what you want to do is up that shutter speed to 120, maybe all the way up to 240 if you're really moving fast. The last camera setting you can adjust is the ISO. ISO is the camera's sensitivity to light. If you increase the ISO, the image gets brighter, but it brings in a lot of noise, reducing the image quality. I'll show you some video I took with my camera, and later I'll share some additional tips to improve the low light performance of yours. Here I've set the frame rate to 24 frames per second and the shutter speed to 1/50th. The ISO is set to a range of 100 to a max of 1600. 1600 being the upper limit, but the camera will lower the ISO if there is sufficient light. At an ISO of 1600, the image is bright with relatively minimal noise, all things considered. You can see when I'm walking, the image gets blurry and shakes. There are 2 reasons for that. 1, the electronic image stabilization doesn't work very well in low light, and 2, the shutter speed is too low. Upping the shutter speed to 120 reduces the blur, but darkens the image, which means you have to increase the ISO, introducing more noise into the image. Action cameras are really meant to be used on bright sunny days, so you're not going to get the best quality in low light situations. So the best thing you can do is adjust how you're going to take your shot. I suggest doing slow movements, shooting things that are stationary, because if you're moving around too much, it's going to create blur, and then you have to up the shutter speed, and then you're going to have to increase the ISO, and then it's going to get even noisier. I found that setting the ISO to 1600 worked pretty well. You can even go to 3200, but personally I would just stop at 1600 and adjust my shot to meet the limitations of the camera. What do you think about the image quality of the Hero 11 in low light? Let me know in the comments. One thing to keep in mind, the image quality on the screen is going to look better than the final product. When I was looking at the screen, all the images were brighter and sharper than what they actually ended up being. So it's best to do some test shots in low light situations. That way you can see how it's going to look, and you can make the minor adjustments to the shutter speed, to the ISO, so you're going to have some idea of what the final product is going to look like. And you won't be shocked or disappointed when you thought it was going to look better. Earlier in the video, I told you I share some additional tips and tricks to get the most out of your camera in low light situations. Well, here's the first one, and it may seem a little counterintuitive, and it is to use a gimbal. And kind of the reason you get an action camera is because you don't want to have a gimbal, because the image stabilization is so great. But in low light, the image stabilization is going to become a problem. So if you have a gimbal, throw your camera onto the gimbal, turn off the image stabilization, and you're not going to get this jitters and the blurring that you can get if you're just trying to rely on the internal image stabilization, because it just struggles in low light. And the next thing you can do is to get one of these. You can find them on Amazon. They don't cost very much money, and this is going to give you the additional light that you need. If you're in a vlog, you're definitely going to need to put light onto your face. There's no way the action camera is going to be able to pick you up. So get a gimbal, throw a light on it, and you are going to drastically improve the low light performance of your camera. After doing some testing and making some minor adjustments, I found the best low light setting for the Hero 11 to be a frame rate of 24 frames per second, the shutter speed of 1/50th, and the ISO max of 1600, and just do your best to stay close to the light source. To learn even more about your Hero 11, check out this video.